So today we're going to go a slightly different route with the podcast. I got a lot of feedback after the first episode. Thank you so much for that. It was really great feedback, but a couple things surfaced, and I really want to attack those things today. Number one, the biggest feedback I got, and I knew this was going to happen, and this is part of this whole project, is why would you name your podcast the Aging Athlete Podcast? Aging is such a negatively used word at this point in our society. It's something we avoid, it's something we're afraid of. Why would I pick that as the name of a podcast? So I'm going to dive into that. And I want to use this idea of a performance triad to talk about aging from the moment you were created all the way through your performance career, all the way through your life, talk about it from a sport perspective, talk about it from a day-to-day life perspective, all the way through from your beginning to your end. So I'm hoping this will shed light on why I chose to study aging with this podcast and really dive into this topic. And I really, have this goal of making that word lose some of its power in terms of negativity and gain some power in what you can still accomplish at any aspect or any age that you are. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about the performance triad. So I want to talk about 3 specific areas that you can focus on for long-term developmental success. Are there more areas you could focus on? Could we break it down even further? Absolutely. We could totally do that, and we would be here for days. So focusing on 3, this is not the end-all be-all. These are 3 that I find very, very valuable for that performance success throughout sport, life, you name it, moving forward. A little bit different format with this today. If you're listening to the audio, you can head over to bowmanclature.com to actually see some slides to go with this presentation as well. And if you're just listening to the audio, sit back and enjoy. If you're following along with the slides, thanks for being here. So the performance triad, what does this mean? Okay, so the word triad, I like to look at the definition of the word first. And it's, honestly, it's a group or a set of 3 things that are intertwined. They're connected in some capacity. So I like to think of it as, triangles without borders. There's 3 distinct shapes you can see, but then the border of each of those shapes is slightly blurred with the border of another one of the shape. So you can't quite tell. There's definitely some definition of where that shape is, but it's not completely clear on where it starts or ends at certain points. It interacts with other pieces of the equation. Okay, lifelong performance is not just a one category approach. There's so much more you have to focus on than just one thing. And that can be super overwhelming for people, but it also allows you to have the flexibility that if you hit a wall at one point, there's other avenues you can focus on to still drive performance in your life, your sport, whatever you're trying to accomplish. So for me, like I said, plenty of different options out there for what a triad of performance could look like. Could we extend it to 5 things, 10 things? Absolutely. But I boiled it down to 3 main categories that we're going to talk about today and why I think this really funnels back into that thought process of aging. So category 1, and these are in no particular order of ranking of importance, but category 1 would be training, what you're doing in your sport, what you're doing in the gym, anything you're trying to do physically to better yourself in your endeavors. Okay, number 2, nutrition. How are you fueling your body? What are you putting in your body? Where are the sources that you're getting this products or this food from? And then number 3 is stress management. And that encompasses so many different things. Like on the surface, first thing I always hear back, oh, what about sleep? Sleep is stress management. What about recovery? Recovery is stress management. They all boil down to this idea of managing stress at different points throughout life. Stress is going to happen. There's no way to completely get rid of stress. If you found a way, please let me know. But I have not. So the best thing we can do is just manage stress the best way we can, or at the highest level that we can. Okay, so let's talk training. Training is the easiest one to start with because it's the one we focus on the most. It's the one that we can actually feel or see. And we always talk about especially here in the US, we're a very work-driven culture. So we want to put in more work so we can see more results. And so it's something that we can almost feel, we can visualize it, we can actually see it play out. It's something that we think we have more control of than maybe stress or maybe nutrition, for example. So training is the one that we are most comfortable with. We know if we've challenged ourselves in the gym, if we challenge ourselves in a sport practice, we know if we maybe copped out a little bit earlier than we could have on a test when it comes to training and assessment. So it's one of those things we can almost see the ends of those triangles a little bit more clearly than maybe some of the other categories of performance. But it's not the only one. It is an important one, and it interacts with these other categories as well. So from an aging perspective, again, I'm looking at aging as from the moment you're created through the moment that you end your time on this earth. Okay, so it's like let's use that as our parameter or our definition of aging. I'm not looking at it as just the time when you hit the quote unquote over the hill status or anything like that. So for a training perspective, when you're looking at youth athletes or just kids who you want to develop a wide base of abilities with, your training should look something like this. It should be something where they can explore. And what I mean by that, you want to put them in scenarios that they have to figure out different problems. How can they solve a problem with movement? Make them balance, take different constraints, add different constraints, change the equation for what they have to do. That is a beautiful way to train someone in their youth. Okay, we didn't even get into sets and reps. We didn't even get into that much structure with that definition. But it should be an exploration. It should be them challenging, trying to figure out their bodies, being put in different scenarios where they're going to have to adapt and probably slightly fail or not succeed on the first attempt. But then as they get more and more comfortable in understanding the objective, they're able to figure it out and learn and hardwire these skills. So again, youth is all about building the base of the pyramid. Sport specificity is a big topic right now, especially in the US. When should kids specialize? I think the longer you can push specialization away, the better when it comes to youth athletes, because they're going to pick up different skills from different sports. Even if the kids do not want to play sports, or achieve, what we want them to achieve as parents, or maybe they just don't have that drive to go play at the college level. Having a wide base as a human being is supremely beneficial as you evolve into different stages of your life. One thing I like to do with kids is I like to work on their weaknesses. Make them, understand the dedication that it takes to work on something maybe that they're not good at. Maybe they're not good at single leg balance. Maybe they're just awkward. They don't understand that. Let's work on it. Let's have some fun. Let's play some games. Let's figure out how we can make this better with repeated exposure. So then that's going to transfer to life. Okay. They're not going to be good at their job right away. They have to learn skills that are going to help propel them in their careers. That's still training. It's just a different, output of what we're looking for versus a sport. We're looking at a career or something like that. If your sport is not your career. So use that time to teach the discipline of working on weaknesses. I like to work on proper patterns. And again, this doesn't have to be super structured. One thing I like to do is, just one time a week or one focus for the week. Maybe we're going to work on our squat form. How well can you squat? How well can you hold a plank? Okay, it doesn't have to be a defined set and rep range. It could just be 10 minutes at the beginning of a session, a gym class, things like that. It's a great way to work on a pattern, not bore the children with the pattern learning, but you're setting the foundation. You're putting those bricks in place. Challenge the senses is another thing. Touch, sight, sound, all those different things are going to be stimuli that they're going to experience for the rest of their life. It's not going to go away, not just in sport, but through day to day. So challenge those senses in training. Kids love that. They love that challenge of trying to figure out why it's harder for them to respond to touch versus sound maybe, or sight. Each kid is going to have a little bit different of a challenge based on the sense being used. So have fun with that. Let that drive some of your training. And again, you've heard me say the word already a bunch of times, but you want to make this fun for kids. So that's the beginning piece of training at the developmental model And again, if you notice, I didn't even break down a training program. I didn't talk sets and reps. We didn't get into different training modalities and styles and things like that. It's an exploration. Let them have fun with it. Teach them different patterns that are valuable. Challenge them to figure out problems. That is a key point of youth development. Then as you get to be an adult, okay, things shift a little bit. You might have a specific goal. Maybe you're training for a triathlon. Maybe you're trying to be a high-level master swimmer. Maybe you're trying to compete in Olympic weightlifting and all these other different endeavors. You're going to get more specific based off your goals, absolutely. But there's some key variables that I want you to think about regardless of the sport you participate in, regardless if you participate in a sport or not, and allow these to help drive that training, that thought process as we're moving forward. As you age, intensity is super important. So what I mean by that is how much are you challenging yourself, or how much of a percentage of your best effort are you utilizing versus focusing on volume, which is how much work you're doing in a certain amount of time, for example. Okay, so for me personally, just personal experience, I'm almost 29 years old, so I'm still a young pup. I get that. But I've already noticed that I start to break down at certain volumes. I've noticed that I cannot push myself with a certain amount of sets and reps and total volume in my training because I start to break down really quickly. That being said, I can push intensity, so I can go 80, 85% of my best effort, 90% of my best effort with adequate rest afterward just fine. And it helps me maintain strength. I get a little bit stronger over time, and I actually have fewer injuries focusing on intensity versus focusing on volume that I can complete. Again, this goes back to that original thought process of training. Training is something that we see, we put in the work. That phrase gets thrown around all the time. Did you put in the work? Work doesn't have to mean abundant volume, especially as you're aging, but I do think intensity is a critical component throughout the course of your life. As that intensity starts to drop, I think that's where things really start to fall off over time. The next thing I want you to think about, I always say this, I say, don't bail out. Don't cheat yourself. So as an adult, okay, you're no longer a kid. It's not someone looking over you as much. But if you know or you feel that something's wrong with your push-up or your squat or anything like that, don't just sit there and be like, oh, okay, well, it was close enough. No, be very tactical about your form. Think about that type of stuff. I think that's super important to long-term development throughout the course of your life. So, I have clients that are in their 70s, in their 60s, clients in their 40s and 50s, and they can tell you that in my notes for training, when I'm programming their sessions or I'm programming what I want them to complete, I'm always harping on form. I'm always asking for video feedback so that we can go and try to critique things and adjust things just a little bit. We don't have to make extreme overhauls, but you can make these fine adjustments over time so you're continuing to perform throughout the course of your life. It's one of those things that if you're dedicated to that process, you're never going to run out of things that you can train with your body. You're never going to run out of things that you can correct and figure out a better process to do something. One of my favorite examples of this, and I'm talking a lot of this from what we're doing in the gym or maybe a training session, but this applies to sport as well. So let's take the sport of swimming, for example, and you could also apply this to running and weightlifting and things like that. Form continues to adapt as we learn more. So the way, if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, for example, or older, the way you swim now is probably not the way you swam in high school if you were a high school swimmer. The form, the technique, the focuses have completely changed from that point. I swam in high school, and like I said, I'm almost 29 at this point. My approach to swimming is completely different now than it was in high school. And I'm even fairly close to that time still if you're looking at the large scheme of things. Technique adapts as we learn more about the sport. So there's always a continuous improvement of form. Same thing applies in the gym. Just because you're good at squats, just because you've been told that you have really good form, doesn't mean there's not something you can work on over time. The next thing I want you to think about as an aging athlete, so if we're getting into that adult category, you have to be more willing to adapt over time because, as we all know, things happen in life, schedules change, it gets a little chaotic out there, but you also have to be really good at kind of this yo-yo effect. You have to know when to push and know when to pull back. Sometimes I go into a training session thinking I'm going to set the world on fire, and I get halfway through the warm-up, and I'm noticing maybe I just don't feel, some things are feeling a little bit heavier than they should. Maybe the bar is feeling a little bit heavier than it should. But I keep warming up. I keep giving myself a chance to work to it. But then I get to this point where I'm at a crossroads. I can either continue to push myself when things are just feeling off, the form's not quite there, or I shut it down, cut my losses, go work on something else that day, and come back prepared to try again the next day. I believe that is a huge component of long-term development. Whether you want to just stay healthy over the course of your life, or if you want to continue to pursue sport throughout your entire life, those things are super critical to be able to have that ability to adapt and understand that maybe the short-term foot off the gas is going to allow you more time to train uninterrupted due to injuries and things like that in the long-term sphere, in the long-term spectrum. So keep that in mind. I think that is a critical component, especially I think if we want to use 30 is in research that point where it seems like things start dropping off, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if we're using that point, I think it becomes super critical at that point, and even before that. But it's something you really want to focus on, your willingness to adapt. And that doesn't mean that we're going to take it easy. It doesn't mean we're just going to kind of mess around each time, but we have to have that flexibility and understanding that the longer we can train uninterrupted, the better opportunity we're going to have to continue to achieve goals throughout the course of our career. So keep that in mind. Another thing, honestly, this applies to all ages, but I put it in the adult category because I think it's just something that as life gets a little more chaotic and there's more responsibility, simplicity is such a relief. So practice simplicity with your training. We don't have to get fancy, but can you do the basic things over and over again for years upon end? That's challenging. That's super challenging. The movement or the practice might not be that difficult in terms of what you have to accomplish, but can you give me that same effort? Can you give me that same quality day in and day out for years stacked upon years? That's super challenging. So take enjoyment with that simplicity, focus on the enjoyment of that simplicity, knowing it's a simple task, but don't allow the simplicity to lull you into a sleepy state. So keep that in mind. And to wrap it all up, honestly, as you continue to train throughout the decades of your life, there's always something that can be tidied up. So do not settle for one piece of form or one accomplishment in training. There's always something you can do a little bit better. And I think if you drive with that mentality, it honestly keeps me up and going back for more. It keeps athletes that I see training and competing, into their 50s and their 60s. There's always something they want to work on. There's always something they can tidy up. So keep that in mind. So this is where I get pretty fired up. We've honestly been fed a lie, and this is why I really want to dive into this word aging a little bit more. That's why I want to have this podcast as an open forum, an open discussion with people in different fields and different goals and backgrounds, and even just my personal thoughts on this, because I think we've really allowed the media and the perception of things to drive the ship. And it really might not have the backing that we give it. So it's something I want to break through and challenge you to think about a little bit more, even in your personal goals, your personal endeavors. Where have you mentally limited yourself? Our mind is super powerful, but it's also a very big limiter because it's so powerful. So if you look at research, and these are very general, okay, so I'm just pulling the general feel that you're going to get from research. Yes, I'm sure you can find studies that say something different, but this is generally what I see. And we're going to use that after the age of 30 point that I talked about. After the age of 30, about a 3 to 5% decrease in muscle mass each decade, about a 10% decrease in strength, and about a 10% decrease in speed. So that doesn't sound very good. 10% per decade, 1% per year. Some people, if you're an optimist, you're like, okay, 1%, that's not too bad. But overall, reductions in strength and speed by 10% per decade, that's very tough if you're trying to be at your best in your 40s, for example. You're already behind the 8 ball by the time you hit 40, let alone 50. And then, if you're in your 60s, this just seems very frustrating to people because people still want to achieve later in life. And especially if you weren't an athlete that got to compete at a very high level when you were younger, adult masters athletics is a great outlet to still go and achieve some awesome things. If you look at different sports, triathlon, right? The more competitive ages are in that middle group that have, the financial resources, the ability to go compete in these events. Master swimming is a great outlet for people to swim all the way to in their hundreds. Track and field, same concept. So there's so much opportunity to compete, but people get very frustrated that they can't achieve what they have in the past. And we've really allowed this thought process of a decrease in muscle mass, decrease in strength, decrease in speed. 30 is the number, so get it done by 30 or sorry, you have no chance. And I honestly just think research is not set up in a way that can capture the correct data to really tell us the true story. So I always say, when I have this conversation, I'm always like, all right, plot twist. Many of these studies do not actually control for training across a lifetime. And it's not really the study's fault. That's just a very hard thing to do. It's very hard. It might even be impossible to actually capture that data in a true IRB approved research study. It's very challenging to do a lifelong study, right? It's almost impossible. So these studies do not actually look at if someone strength trained their entire life. They don't look at someone who had no interruptions in athletic performance throughout their entire life, because those are very challenging things to achieve. When you get out of college and you start a job, there's sometimes a break there. If your relationships change throughout the course of your life, there might be a break in your training because of that. You have your first child, that's going to interrupt things when it comes to training. So it's very tough to actually see what these studies can actually tell us about ourselves. It's very tough to accept these, but we accept these things. And I'm not saying that you're never going to have interruptions, but we're basing our studies basing our thoughts off of variables that are not even taken into consideration in a continuous pattern over the course of life. So keep that in mind. That's where all this stuff is coming from. And again, it's not a knock on the research, because I just don't think you're going to be able to get this information in mass amounts for at least an extended period of time. Like, we have a lot of work cut out for us on that, but it's something you need to be aware of and not put this, mental shackle on performance just because you're past the age of 30. So as you can see, I'm already diving in. I'm peeling back why this whole concept of aging athlete is so interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, I truly do not believe, or I truly think we have no idea what a 40-year-old can actually accomplish. I truly believe we have no idea what a 50-year-old can accomplish with proper training and nutrition and all that type of stuff. I think our thought process of athletic careers and things of that nature are because of very, constrained societal norms that, definitely have a role, and they're not going to go away. But I think it's very foolish to accept that as like, okay, well, I'm 31, so I'm never going to be as fast as I was in my 20s. Or I'm never going to be as strong as I was in my 20s. I think that's a very powerful lie that, with the correct interventions and the correct focuses, not even complete overhauls, just correct focuses, can definitely be minimized. And you can definitely have a shot, especially with improved technique and and things like that, and more hours at your sport if you're participating in a sport or in training, or even the same thing at your job. The more time you spend doing your job, the more repetition you get, the more efficient you get, the more work you can accomplish in a smaller amount of time, the more you're going to be able to achieve. It's the same concept from a professional, job scenario and performance scenario in sport. It's the same overall underlying principles. So this is super fascinating to me on how we figure this out, and how maybe even in the interim we get people to stop waving white flags too early. And that's something that I want to really dive into. So we have to do this on an individual level to start. We need people to take more, internal control, or look and reflect and figure out things that they can adjust to drive performance. So there's some individual factors that are going to affect whether or not you've quote unquote peaked in your 20s, or if there's a chance you could peak later in your career. Number one is your training age. Did you start training at a very young age, in your 8, 9, 10-year-old range, even earlier? Or did you really start training at a high level in your 20s? If you started training later in life, then you're not even close to hitting a peak. You haven't had enough time and repetition in your sport or in training in the gym, lifting weights, all that type of stuff, to even hit a training peak. Also, what's your sporting background? Did you play a lot of sports as a kid, or were you more specialized from the beginning? Did you go to a gym class that really challenged you in multiple categories? Or were you one that kind of just hung out on the wall and didn't really partake in that? Because that's going to adjust how much potential change you could have at different points of your career. There's stuff we can work on that maybe you haven't even scratched the surface on, and your body's always willing to learn. Your mind is always willing to learn if you give it the opportunity to. Next one is stoppages. Did you have a long layoff because of a severe injury? Did you have a long layoff because of a life event that occurred? Those stoppages add up, and that's time that you're not training, so that's going to affect the overall training age. It's also going to affect the time, ramping back up and getting into things. Okay, and then technique. Did you start your career in a different era of technique, and things have continuously improved? I don't know anyone that can say no to that question. If you've been on this planet for even a decade. So keep that in mind. Technique is always improving. So the thing to take away from all these first 4 bullet points, so the training age, the sporting background, stoppages, and technique, there's somewhere you can go to try to drive new performance. So even if you have trained your whole life, has your technique improved? Is there something you can improve upon? Absolutely. So there's where you go. Maybe your sporting background was relatively limited. So maybe we mix in different movement patterns and things that you're not used to that might unlock performance that you were unable to achieve previously. Okay, you had stoppages in time. So now we just got to continue to drive your training age. We got to continue to get more time and repetition to get you to where you want to go. So there's no limiting factor here. It's just where you had the limitation, go somewhere else. Or if that's your limitation, work on that area. And if you think you might have maximized all you can out of that area to this point, which is very rare, you still have 3 other areas you can go focus on. And then even outside of training, you have the other 2 components, nutrition and stress management. So we just spent probably almost a half an hour talking about training because it's the most tangible. It's the one we most associate with when we're talking about this performance thing, this performance spectrum, regardless if it's sport or your job, or just you want to get a little bit better every day. You want to lose a little bit more weight, get a little bit healthier, things like that. Okay, we talked about the big one that we all think about, but even in that group, there's 4 different little categories, and we can extend that to 10, 20, 30 categories that you can go to squeeze out a little bit more performance. So you already have endless categories there, endless areas to go to focus on, and we haven't even touched nutrition and stress management. So you can see here, this is why aging is so interesting. We put so much time and thought into how we are limited instead of going to look at these limitations and where we can squeeze out a little bit more performance. Shifting that mindset, all of a sudden, aging is not that scary, that negative of a thing. Just means we have to adjust our course. So I want you to keep that in mind. So we got training out of the way. And as you can tell, I'm already all pumped up and fired up about this. But let's head into nutrition next. So nutrition, simply put, is it's the fuel. It's the gas that fuels the engine. It's what you need to put in to get something to happen, or output, right? Without nutrition, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to function. They're literally foundational pieces to you waking up every day. So without the nutrition component, you don't even get to go train. So keep that in mind. Again, like I said at the beginning, these three areas are not ranked in terms of importance, but nutrition has to happen so you can actually physically move. So it has that importance. There's tons of areas of nutrition. I'll probably do a whole other podcast on nutrition, but today I'm just going to focus on three areas that I find the most common struggle in today's world. And those three areas are hydration, fructose, and protein. And again, you could totally sub in a ton of different ones. I just picked these three for today. If you have any other questions on different ones, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to go down that rabbit hole. I love going down rabbit holes. So let's talk hydration, though. The biggest key point I take away from hydration, there's a couple studies out there on this, probably even more now since the last time I looked, but a small deviation in your cell size, so a foundational piece of your body, the cell, can result in impaired abilities, and it can be as bad as if you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs or something of that nature. So if we look at any of the tests done on reaction and power and things like that under the influence of alcohol, for example, we know that those tests are negatively affected by that consumption. So a small deviation in hydration of your cells results in a similar effect to that influence of alcohol. For me as an athlete, and for me for working with athletes, that's already scary enough because our body uses a lot of our hydration in repair and recovery. Even when you're sleeping, there's a reason you wake up the next day feeling a little bit thirsty already. It's because we pulled that hydration to help with that recovery process. So I don't see a lot of athletes getting the hydration they need, or they're getting hydration from the improper sources, and they haven't taken the steps to actually look at their hydration and know what type of hydration their body truly needs. So moving on from the cell piece, if you're a meat eater, if you train at a high level, have you even considered looking at your water as a way to balance out your body's pH? So Sips Baleka, he was in the first podcast I did on the Aging Athlete podcast. Fantastic talk. If you haven't listened to it, definitely go check it out. He brings up this point that he has to look at his water's pH level to balance out what he's eating and how he's training. So it takes, again, look how these are all connected. It takes stress off of his body in terms of recovery and overall performance. If your hydration is stressing out your system, if what you're eating is stressing out your body, then you're just pulling valuable resource away from what you could be using for actual action in terms of movement and performance. So if you're fighting your own body with what you're putting in it, you're already setting yourself up for failure when it comes to actual movement. So keep that in mind. He had some fantastic points just about how he has to balance his water, or his water needs to reflect what he's doing elsewhere. I doubt many people listening to this have actually taken those steps. So that's a great way. Again, there's somewhere you can squeeze out a little extra performance right there. And then, even like a relative ballpark of how much water you should drink a day. And you see, I keep saying water. I don't keep saying soda or sports drinks. Yes, there's other forms of hydration out there. But for the simplicity of this talk and not to go on too many tangents, we're just going to talk about water. So what I like to do, I do this with athletes, I do this with different talks that I go through. I try to do these simple weekly goal progressions over the course of a month to stimulate some change. I think we set a goal, but then we never work backwards from it to the simple building block of that goal. So I try to work a lot of goals like this moving forward with athletes. So it's not, we're taking one bite of the elephant at a time instead of trying to eat the whole thing. So week 1, you should try to aim for 3 cups of water first thing in the morning. When you wake up, you're usually a little bit dehydrated. I know even me personally, sometimes my first sip is coffee. Although there's water in coffee and there's definitely a hydration and a dehydration component to that, aiming for 3 cups of just plain water or even water with lemon first thing in the morning is already going to start you off on a better foot. So I say take week 1, I want you to do that for 7 days. Week 2, we get a little bit general here. And again, this is a very general overview. I don't know you or what you're personally training for. So this is just a general rule of thumb. I'll say week 2, gentlemen, I want you to aim for 16 cups over the course of a day, 16 cups of water. Women or ladies, I want you to aim for 11 cups a day. Again, based off your environment, based off how hard you're training, all those type of things. I understand that's going to be a little bit flexible, but just as a general rule of thumb, 16 cups for gentlemen, ladies, 11 cups for you. Week 3, your total ounces a day should be your body weight in pounds times 0.5, and then add 10 to that. So then that's how many ounces of water you should get over the course of a day. So then now we have a little bit more specific based off of body weight. Again, yes, many factors out there from your environment. Is it hot? Is it cold? How much you're training? All that type of stuff definitely play a role. Then I like to finish the month, and then with the goal of continuing this trend after the month is over, week 4, I want you to limit any liquid calories outside of your performance nutrition. So if you take a protein shake, or if you have some sort of caffeine and coconut powder, pre-workout blend with some BCAAs, whatever you like to do, limit any liquid calories outside of that. That's super challenging, right? So we don't like to drink water all day. There's very few people that I've met that are truly okay with water all day, every day. But I think there's some value to limiting liquid calories outside of your sports or performance training aids. Honestly, if you want a great weight loss tip, that's one of your goals, week number 4, that's probably one of the best ones I have. Moving on, let's talk fructose. So we got through hydration. So, fueling your cells, making sure your cells have proper hydration, make sure your body's got the beneficial, ingredient of water to help with recovery and balancing out pH. Next thing is fructose. And honestly, years ago, fructose wasn't an issue. It's, fructose occurs in fruit. It's something that is found naturally in, certain foods that we're going to eat. But our mass production of sugar has kind of led to this overconsumption of fructose. So biggest thing I want you to go and focus on with that is the source matters. Are you getting it from a whole fruit, or are you getting it from a sugary fruit juice? So keep that in mind. Whole fruit versus the juice, where we're adding all this extra sugar to it, man-made products, high fructose corn syrup, things like that. Again, never was an issue in the past until we started to mass produce sugar at alarming rates. And we've even found other ways to make sugar and apply it under different names. So it's very challenging to know how much you're actually getting. Chronically high levels of fructose. I've had some research coming out on just effects on the body, how it's wearing down different parts of your body, diabetes, things like that. All of these things are pulling away from your ability to perform and have that energy to perform at a high level later in life. Again, it's the fuel that is going to drive the movement. So real quick, not getting too deep into this, but just so you understand the differences of fructose compared to other carbohydrates, it fails to stimulate a ingredient called leptin. It fails to stimulate leptin production. So leptin essentially rises when you had enough to eat. So it's trying to kill your willingness to eat, and then it decreases when it's time to eat. Like you need some more food, so leptin starts to go down. Okay, decreased leptin levels um, are always there during a chronic fructose intake, so they don't really start to elevate as much as they're supposed to. So imagine you see a stop sign and you drive right past it. Okay, that stop sign is your body telling you that you're full. But if you have chronically high fructose intake, you don't even see that stop sign and you blow right past it. And then you continuously do that over and over again, which results in more wear and tear on your body, can result in unwanted weight gain, all of that type of stuff. And honestly, you should try to limit fructose as much as you can. I've seen a general number. I've seen anything under 20, 15 to 20 grams a day is a good goal, especially in today's society. But here's the kicker. One soda is 35 grams of fructose already. So just one standard soda is already putting you over that threshold. And again, you should try to limit that more. You should try to get it from whole fruit, not processed. But keep in mind, one soda is already putting you over that threshold for chronic use if you're doing that over and over and over again. So you can see why liquid calories, going back to the first one, is so important if we're talking about that hydration. Because don't get me wrong, I grew up on root beer and pizza were Friday nights at my house as a kid, and realizing what effects that can have on just your overall life, number one, and absolutely number two, on your overall performance. The last one, again, not getting into too much detail here, not going down too much of a rabbit hole with this one, but protein. And the reason I put protein in here is just honestly from personal experience. Even when I've tried to calculate how much I need, be very tactical in my approach, I still struggle to get enough protein in my diet. I don't know why. I feel like I'm doing as much as I can. It's actually a very tough thing to get enough protein in my diet. And it's something I have to be very intentional about. So, number one, just like we talked about with fructose, your source matters. If you're getting really crummy, or if you're getting protein but with a bunch of extra things added to it, processed, for example, processed meat, things like that, you're getting a lot of baggage with your protein. So keep that in mind. It's not as simple as just getting enough protein. It's how well your sources are, how high quality your sources are. And this is both true for meat that you're getting at the store, or your vegetables, things like that, wherever you're getting your protein, your peas, beans, all that type of stuff. The source matters, number one, but then this also matters for if you're taking a protein supplement. Know where your protein is coming from. Is it a high quality source, maybe like New Zealand, where they're, non-GMO, grass-fed, year-round cows, so you're getting the benefit of IgG for gut health and all that type of stuff, or you're getting something that has been heavily processed, tons of sugars added to it, things that are going to negatively impact you as well. So make sure your protein sources do not have too much baggage. And I know that is a super challenging point in today's world. So do the best you can. Obviously, we're not looking for perfection with that, but it's something you should keep in mind and definitely be aware of. We all know, or I think most of us know, protein is a very helpful piece when it comes to muscle maintenance. So if you want to grow muscle, you want to maintain the quality of your muscle, all that type of stuff, helping with recovery, remodeling in the body, protein is very much a part of that process. And like I said, the reason I included it with these other two is because for me personally, it is a struggle to get enough protein in my diet. And I'll track it and things like that. And I always have to be very intentional of that process. So it makes me think that I enjoy this stuff. This is my field. This is my career. If it's that hard for me, a lot of other people are probably struggling with that point as well. We're on to our last point now. We'll wrap up the nutrition. And again, like I said, I probably should do a whole nother podcast on nutrition. But I figured it would be good to hit a couple key takeaways that you can take home with you today and implement. But the last one I want to talk about of this triad is stress management. And this is something, don't get me wrong, this is something I have to work on every day. This is something that will always be around and is only going to get more and more challenging to manage. So it's something that you should start, even regardless of what point you are in your life. Try to implement something today that's going to positively affect your stress management. And here's the thing, stress is also a good thing. So stress in training results in change. Okay. If you stress the body just enough without completely wearing it down, but a little bit more than last time, you're going to cause it to change. It's going to have to adapt. Stress in sport usually means a higher awareness at the task at hand. You hit this another state, you hit a different level. You might tap into this flow state where you have a balance of stress and the task at hand. And it's one of those things that results in beautiful athletic performance. So stress is not all bad, but it has to be managed, good or bad. So we all, again, just like aging, stress has a very negative feel to it. But there's positive stress, there's negative stress, and both of them have to be managed. So let's talk about stress management. And I put this picture, if you're watching on the website, put this picture of a ball and chain, because this is what I think of stress. It's not a physical gain of a weight on your body, although it could be over time, but it has a similar effect to more weight pulling you down and wearing you down over time. It might not be in the physical sense, but it is a weight that is attached to you and dragging you and slowing you down, or just taking you a step below what you could accomplish if you had a little bit better stress management tactics. And stress doesn't just stop at, okay, I had a stressful day at work, or that was a stressful meeting. Stress has a couple different categories as well, just like training. Stress management involves sleep. Stress management involves recovery from training, recovery from acute stimulus, recovery from competition. Stress management also involves day-to-day tasks, and it also involves during a competition. So there's all these different categories. So just because you can't achieve in one of these categories is no reason to nix the entire focus of stress management. So sleep. We should try to, we know all these things at this point. We see the posts, turn off all the blue lights. Make sure it's a dark, cool place for you to sleep. Make sure you have a high quality mattress, breathable sheets, all that type of stuff. We get that. But it's a huge component of where this regeneration process, this repair, and one thing we forget about, sleep is where long-term skill acquisition is really finalized in the body. So a lot of memory processing occurs at sleep, making it long-term, making sure it gets stored properly in your system. Memory or skill learning is a memory that needs to be fine-tuned with sleep. So if you're learning a very complex skill in a deprived state, it's going to take you longer to master that complex skill. Okay, right there is performance. A little more sleep, decrease the time it takes you to master a complex skill because that memory is getting stored long-term faster. Boom, we're on to the next thing. We wasted less time, or we were more efficient with our time of learning a new skill. Okay, obviously regeneration, recovery, all that stuff happening at sleep as well, or during sleep as well. So it's a very important component of stress management. And I know we harp on it, and I know it's probably, especially for a non-professional or even professional athlete, but athletes that have day jobs and things like that, sleep is one of the harder ones because of families. There's all these different things pulling at sleep. Our society says work more, rest less, all that type of stuff. It makes it very hard to go out and focus on that point. But any improvement in that category is going to be massively helpful to your performance, again, in sport, if you're just doing fitness goals, or just in life in general. Recovery. This is one that as you age becomes even more and more important. As a kid, I remember being able to play basketball for 4 hours straight, waking up the next day and doing it all over again. I remember being able to surf. If there was a hurricane swell during the summer when I was surfing, you weren't getting me out of the water for 6 hours. I took I took a thing of sunblock in my board shorts. I wasn't even going to come in and put sunblock on. I just put it out in the water, right? As a kid, it's a lot easier to do that. As we age, we know what this recovery process looks like, and we know that it takes us longer to bounce back. So we focus our sights, like I talked about earlier on training, we focus our sights on the work, and we often forget the rest. Improvement is going to happen during that rest phase. But do not let that be an excuse to not properly apply a stimulus that deserves rest. If you don't do the work or you don't challenge yourself with the intensity, then the rest is not going to have as much value in terms of your training performance and getting better. Because if we're not really challenging ourselves, then we're just kind of in a stagnant state anyway. But do not forget about the rest. And that's something that as you age, so we get into this word aging, you have to be even more and more aware about over time. So the biggest thing, if you take nothing away from the rest of this portion, recovery, remember that improvement is going to happen during the rest. Okay? The last two I'm going to group together a little bit. So we talked about day-to-day management of stress, and then also during a competition. And so I want you to think about, in a nutshell, stopping negative momentum before it gets out of control. And then I want you to harness positive momentum into a more sustainable route for long-term performance. And that's going to take part in actual competition. It's going to take a role throughout your career. It's also going to take a role throughout your day-to-day life. Negative momentum that isn't checked at the door continues to grow and grow and grow until all of a sudden you're in a pretty dark place. Positive momentum can be equally exciting at first and then taxing over time. So you have to be able to maintain and manage that positive momentum, try to stretch it out a little bit more, know how to get yourself back to a positive state when negativity is starting to push in. So you have to be able to harness and kind of control, not necessarily start and stop that positive momentum, but control the flow of it as best you can. So what I want you to think about with that, what that means for your day-to-day and also in sport. I had a great talk a few days ago with one of my great friends, Dr. David Wyman. He's a performance psychologist, so he works with Fortune 500 companies. He's helped me throughout my surfing career when I was younger and competing and having some mental blocks with, I would surf really well in practice and training, but then I'd get into competition and struggle at the competitive scene. So he has both that work side and performance side that he's interacted with over the course of his career. And he brought up some great points from the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Lab and some studies that they're doing. And one of the key ones I took away from the talk I had with him, and this was just honestly a normal check-in talk, but it really got me thinking about all this, is they were comparing tennis players at the highest level. They were comparing elite level tennis players that if you broke down their metrics, how fast they could serve, how well their agility would score, their strength, the team they had around them, from hydration to sleep specialists, you name it, almost equal, virtually identical. These top two athletes or these elite level athletes would be. But then the question that they posed was, why are there not more ties? So if we're using the sport of tennis, we know tennis never ends in a tie. It's going to continue until someone wins. So with all of these variables the same and athletic abilities relatively similar, like very minimal differences that shouldn't amount to somebody really winning or losing, why are there not more ties? Why is it just not a complete forfeit by both athletes to be like, we've hit the end? Like no one is going to settle the score. And what they found is the athletes that were most successful were the ones that were good at essentially breaking the routine with very small gestures and performance. So a simple release of the racket instead of death gripping the racket the whole course of the match was found to be a valuable thing. Self-talk when things are going bad and self-talk when things are going in the right direction were found to be valuable keys to who actually won the match and who lost. So when everything else was equal, the ability to manage stress is the thing that would carry someone over the top. So I want you to think about that. It's simple. They broke it down to these little things like releasing pressure off the racket, not having a death grip the whole time. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit of stress management. It's getting some blood flowing. It's probably also helping very small fractions with stored energy to be able to finish the job at hand. Self-talk, again, stopping that negative momentum. All right, you just served into the net a bunch of times. You're not out of it. We got to stop that before it becomes worse and do some damage control and switch things around. And then harnessing positive momentum. So yeah, we're on a roll, but we still have to maintain basic skills and qualities of movement so that we stay on this roll. We get really excited when things are going well, and then form starts to break down sometimes. So being able to harness that positive momentum in a way that's going to allow you to continue to expand that momentum is critical. So they found that with these tennis players, someone who could break the routine and just change pace a little bit over the course of a match made the difference when they were lined up with a equal opponent. In your day-to-day side, they took this information, and again, this is all, just recalling my talk here, and it's super fascinating, something I'm actually diving a lot more into. During the day-to-day, so if you're a master's athlete or an adult athlete that still likes to compete, and you sit at a desk all day, they found that people that would just get up and do 10, 15 hinge motions at their desk, a couple squats at their desk, and then sit back down, were able to control this momentum throughout the day a little bit better and maybe be a little bit more productive at their job. Again, that's super helpful just from a performance of sport aspect because you're getting a little movement, more blood flow, working on range of motion, not tightening up as much, all that good stuff. But then it had the positive effect of affecting their performance in the workplace. So an added benefit there, or for some people, a very important benefit in their career. So it all boiled down to being able to stop negative momentum. They came out of a tough meeting, read a tough email, whatever. All right, up, couple hinges, couple squats, couple arm circles, boom, back down, let's go. Okay, we stopped that negative train before we shocked the system. We changed our path a little bit. And then if things are positive, they're still breaking that routine a little bit, allowing their heart rate to come down after some exciting news, focusing on what they need to do, breaking up the routine before they act too quickly, and then maybe form breaks down in the workplace or in the sport. So as you can see, if we can control training, and not even control, because I don't think control is the right word, but if we can harness our efforts and focus on the quality of our training, our nutrition, and our stress management, we truly do not know what a human being can accomplish at different decades of their life. We have plenty of examples. Like I mentioned, Sip Spaleka, he was on the first podcast. The guy's fantastic. He's swimming college times in his 40s, his upper 40s. And he swam at the Division I level. And he's actually beat a couple of his college times in his 40s. Okay, that's exciting news for anyone that's like, well, I competed at a high level in college. So did he. And he's able to do it. But he is a tactical athlete when it comes to this stuff. He is focusing on all of these little details and finding where he can squeeze out just a little bit more. Do you have to be that focused with it? No, I think if you focus on these little areas one by one over time, it's going to add up to a longer window of performance throughout your life. So it's something I want you to keep in mind that, yes, you have all this information now, and maybe you knew some of this and you just need a reminder. Don't go implement everything at once. Pick one thing, master that, add another layer onto that. Master that, add another layer onto that, and keep progressing over time. And I think you're going to set yourself up for a beautiful window of performance throughout your life. And maybe, just maybe, we'll see more data that comes out to show that these decreases in strength and speed are a lot smaller, if not a lot later in life than we originally expected. Thanks for tuning in today. As always, head over to bowmanclature.com if you have any more questions, want any more resources there. It's kind of the house for everything that I'm posting and doing these days. Feel free to check it out. And thank you for tuning in today.